The hour is 7, having arrived. This meeting of the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole will come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Ammons? Here. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Jacobson?
Here.
Mr. Madigan?
Here.
Ms. Marlin?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe?
Here.
Mayor Pressing? Here.
Okay, a quorum is present. So the next agenda item is approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, July 28th, 2014. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Madam Mayor?
Are you skipping item 2? Or did it get switched?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to read better. Agenda item number 2, I'm sorry. Additions to the agenda and staff reports.
Yeah.
Charlie?
Yeah, I'd like to move items 5 and 6, the two ordinances with respect to liquor licenses, to the end of the agenda, so that
Okay, I
you can
appreciate
recuse
that.
yourself.
That will accommodate me, so I appreciate that. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to move agenda items 5 and 6.
Actually, those are agenda items 6 and 7 on the amended
Oh,
agenda.
sorry. I'm looking at the wrong
Do
one.
we have an amended agenda printed out?
6
All right, now for the real agenda. Charlie, would you like to
Yeah,
restate
so
the
items
motion?
6 and 7
I didn't bring my computer.
to the end of the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to move items 6 and 7 to after agenda item number 10. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. All right, now, agenda item number 2 is additions to the agenda and staff reports. Madam Mayor.
I have a staff report. I've got some sad news, and that is that our comptroller, Rich Henschel, will be leaving, and that's due to a family matter. But he has done a lot to modernize the accounting system. And one of the things that he found recently was that we had $4.5 million deposited in a bank. You know, the FDIC limit is for insurance is $250,000, so we have $4.5 million that was not collateralized, and that's a violation of the city policy. So he asked Jim Simon to look into it, and Jim Simon has a report on that.
The city has a policy that essentially provides that 100% of all city funds must be placed either at a level of FDIC insurance coverage, and if the deposits exceed that, the city is required to collateralize the investments. Currently, FDIC insurance covers $250,000 of a depositor's deposits in total. So if the city has more than $250,000 in any bank, whatever amount is above the 250 is not covered by FDIC insurance. But the city can purchase collateral from that bank or financial institution. And apparently, going back a number of years, it was discovered that the former comptroller was not placing at least these funds in collateralized form. There is a cost for collateralizing. Right now, all investments in banks, deposits, savings accounts, CDs, that kind of thing, they don't earn very much. If you're lucky if you get 1%. But it's much less, about half of that, if you purchase collateral. Now, the collateral would be high-quality stocks and other investments that a bank would purchase at, according to our policy, a requirement that the collateral be 125% of the value of what's invested. And so out of the investments in one bank, there's about, as the mayor indicated, about $4.5 million, of which $250,000 of it's collateralized. Now, the city also has other investments, has about $32 million placed with Morgan Stanley. And in checking, actually Mike Munson checked with Morgan Stanley, and it turns out what they have done is some of the money is placed in various types of deposits in high-quality banks around the country, with no bank having more than $250,000. So for those investments, they're fully insured. Other funds are placed in T-bills, treasuries, which are backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. They have yet to fail on a T-bill. In any event, so those funds are secure. They're protected. But this $4.5 million is not. And so when the CDs were purchased, they were purchased contrary to our city policy. So the council, next week, when the council convenes, will have one of two options: either to vote on a resolution or to waive the policy for these particular investments, and as they roll over, then collateralize them, or collateralize them now, as of the date the bank is told to collateralize them. I was asked for my recommendation from the mayor, and my recommendation, being conservative on something like this, is absolutely collateralize them.
Okay, any questions or comments? Eric?
I guess maybe we'll really talk about this next week, but it sounds as though there are a couple of possibilities. One would be to distribute the amount across multiple banks, no more than $250,000 in each one. One would be to collateralize the investments in each one, or one would be to put them in T-bills. That would be consistent with our policy.
All of it would be consistent with our policy if we did that, if we spread it out, turn the money over to Morgan
Right.
Stanley. Now, we do have some funds, about $760,000, placed with IMET, which is a municipal, it's a non-for-profit group that was set up to assist Illinois municipalities in managing these funds in a protected way. So there are a number of ways of doing it. Again, unfortunately, FDIC covers depositors, not individual deposits. So if you have, in this case, I think there were, 13 or 14 CDs with the one institution. And while each individual CD may be $250,000, only one of them would be insured.
But, okay.
But yes, your suggestion
So
is an
we'll-
option.
So we'll maybe look at these options, maybe with an assessment of which one is going to provide, I mean, I realize the rate of return won't be much, but which one will provide a relatively greater rate of return?
I hadn't intended on looking at the interest rates because they're so minimal at this point. I think part of it for this, some of this money obviously needs to be accessible for use to pay obligations of the city. So whatever change, we have to at least, at a minimum, maintain some sense of laddered investments.
Carol?
Of course, I'm not a banking person, but I'd like to do two things. One is ask for us to receive an actual written report on this so that we can catch up before we make a decision of this
absolutely.
magnitude. And then two, I had received from last year's Municipal League Conference actually a best practice in financial planning for cities. And we actually need to do that. I'm going to actually bring a recommendation to the council for that because we've lost our comptroller now, it looks like 2 times, and we've had some financial problems in the finance department that maybe we need to do some reevaluation of the best practices.
I think that would be
So,
an excellent response to the situation. Just so you all know, this problem was not compounded by Rich. This problem was discovered by Rich as digging into the operation of the finance department.
Diane?
how long has this account been uncollateralized, and is it in a local institution, or is it in all but one institution?
As far as we know, it goes back at least to 2009. It may go back earlier. We are aware of it as of 2009. It's in one institution, and it is a local institution, yes.
And why would one choose not to collateralize?
I don't know. The financial answer would be you have to pay for the collateralization by a reduced interest rate. But regardless of that, the answer is it shouldn't have happened, at least based on city policy. Somebody ignored city policy.
Bill, and then Dennis.
Yeah, I know, or I'm pretty sure from what I've read in the previous quarterly investment reports that I used to read before I got on council is that they existed. We got a quarterly investment report, but we haven't had one since I've been on council in the past year and a half almost. So that's at least 6 quarters we haven't had a quarterly investment report. So I guess I'd ask, as part of this written report, is to recreate what we used to get as a quarterly investment report, and details so we know exactly what we have and what we have invested and where it is.
I think that would be something that the finance department would normally prepare, and with Rich leaving, Mayor would probably have a better sense of who that person would be, whether it's the interim when such a person joins us, or we find somebody to fill Rich's shoes. But in concept, I think from a legal standpoint, absolutely. You all are fiduciaries of the city's money.
Well, I don't think I've ever seen actually the finance policy, but so that would be another good thing to have available, I think, is if there is a finance policy, make that available to council.
Agreed.
Dennis.
So it seems to me that we've had audit reports in the past for our community, our city, and I'm wondering why it didn't appear in a review.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
I understand that we've had audit reports, of the city's finances in the past, and I'm wondering why it didn't appear in an audit.
I think you'd have to ask the auditor that. I don't know why it didn't appear. I have my thoughts on it that I would prefer not necessarily to share at this time, but I can talk with you later.
All right, any more questions or comments? Moving right along. Any other staff reports? Any other additions to the agenda? All right, seeing none. Approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, July 28th, 2014. Is there a motion?
Second.
Moved by Carol, seconded by Diane. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Nay. The ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. All right, public input. If anybody else has a public input card, I have 2 up here. Go ahead and fill out the yellow cards at the back and bring them up to the clerk. So Esther Pat wants to speak at the time of the agenda item, as does Ken Kaiser. So we have no public input at this point in time. So we will, I'm sorry? Oh. Evelyn Underwood, I assume is remaining concerned about the Dr. Ellis subdivision and the sewer problem. All right, we'll make that part of the record. Okay, agenda item number 5 is entitled Presentation Digital Billboards. I added this to the agenda. It's not necessarily a presentation per se, but Kane Kaiser with Adams Outdoor Advertising is here in support. And I don't think necessarily need a presentation at this point in time, but what I asked Kane to do and why I asked for this to be added to the agenda, and Diane Marland supported that addition, is to start to get the ball rolling, at least on looking at the draft ordinance that they've put together. And I think Kane can speak more specifically to it if we need to, but I think the goal here is just to, let's get the ball rolling. We talked about starting to review this in the fall, and we're knocking on the door of fall now. So I think several of us on the council think it's appropriate to at least start with their draft, which all aldermen, I think, have individually met with Adams about and have been able to give their input and their comments. So with that, Kane, if you want to say a few words, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I'm Kane Kaiser with Adams Outdoor Advertising at 1711 Dobbins Drive in Champaign. As Mike brought up, this past spring, it was told that we should wait till fall to see if we could get the city staff up and running again in the planning department. So what we did was we worked with multiple council members to come up with a draft ordinance to give the staff a baseline to start from, so it wouldn't take as much effort to compile an initial ordinance. So it's something that they can build off of, and something that is a culmination of multiple ordinances from other Adams markets throughout the United States that we felt, addressed a lot of the specific suggestions that a lot of you had. So we would just like to pass that ordinance on to staff.
Okay, any comments? Charlie?
Yeah, if there's majority support for getting this on the schedule, I'm going to ask the mayor and Libby what their timeline is, and I know the CD is still short-staffed. To me, fall begins, September 21st officially, roughly. So September 28th, October timeframe would be appropriate, but I don't know if the staffing can be ready for that. So I think it's the mayor and Libby who can really address that.
Mayor?
Well, I think we have a lot of experience in dealing with the issue of billboards, and I think that an ordinance should be drawn up by the city legal staff rather than the industry representatives, but we'll certainly be willing to consider what they have proposed. I understand that in Champaign, it started out with a proposal to substitute, I think it was one digital billboard for every 3. Is that what it started out with?
2 faces for each digital face.
Okay, so, but then it got to be equal, right?
It's still that way. They address a certain area of town, which they call the overlay district, which we have to take 2 billboard faces out of to get 1 digital.
Yeah, 'cause
and it can be faces from anywhere. It doesn't have to be technically one back-to-back sign, but it can be just faces.
yeah, because I think that there was a concern on the Urbana City Council of having a reduction in the total number. And it's a question of how do you measure it. I know that a digital billboard can have 8, maybe 8 different ads on it.
That's correct.
So it makes a lot more money for the company, which I understand would be your legitimate interest, but I'm concerned about reducing the total number. And we don't have the staff right now, but Libby can comment on that.
We have started work on this, doing the background research, which is reviewing the proposal, in researching what other communities are doing. So we've begun, the work in drafting a potential amendment. We've pulled our maps out, so we have try to get our inventory. It's a few years old, so we've got to revise that. Some of the things that I think will be important in the amendment will be change time, the trade-off, as the mayor was mentioning. So those will be important things to consider, as well as the locations. So I think the fall is a good time frame. Before we would bring it to Plan Commission, we would also want to have some special review of the proposed amendment conducted by some outside experts in the area, just to make sure that we're proceeding properly, and I think that's something that we would advise. But we are getting close, and it did help to have the information, and we're still a little down in staff, but they're very energetic. So I'm very pleased with what the planning division's been able to do over the last month, and this is one area where we've made some real progress. So could be late September or October.
Mayor?
Yeah, I'd like to add that one of my concerns is distracted driving. And one of the intersections that we've talked about maybe having digital billboards would be University and Lincoln Avenue.
Right.
But there was a very serious accident there. So I want us to look at what is the research on the effect on drivers. I
And
think
that's
that's
fine,
really
yeah.
an important consideration. There's
Definitely,
aesthetic
definitely.
considerations, there's, what's the city going to get out of it? I know there are a lot of businesses that might be enthusiastic about it, but there are a lot of other people that don't like the idea, so I think we have some work to do.
Understandable.
And we have found some studies that are not industry founded or funded on the driver distraction, so we're getting some great materials.
Okay, good.
Eric?
So I have looked for several hours, and maybe I've seen some of the studies you've seen, Libby, but I've spent a few hours looking at peer-reviewed studies of driver safety, and I have not been able to find any studies that conclude that static electronic displays are a safety hazard. I just haven't been able to find them. Maybe, but it may be that there are. I guess I have seen some. Well, I've seen concerns expressed in those literature, but again, nothing inclusive about the time of the static display. It's really obvious, I think, or not, it's not obvious. Driving is really complicated, and people are really complicated, so nothing is obvious, but it does seem clear that animated displays are potentially a problem. But I haven't seen anything that says that static displays are a problem. I share the mayor's concern about that particular intersection. I happened to have the really unsettling experience of arriving at that intersection just seconds after the accident and seeing the person who was unfortunately run over and killed. So I am very concerned about that intersection and about dangerous intersections. That intersection in particular, but as I understand your proposal, there right now are 5, I believe, billboard faces. There are 6 billboard faces at that intersection, and at least you've expressed the intention of replacing those 6 with 1.
Correct.
So seems to me to be an improvement. So anyway, yes, I believe that I think we should go ahead with the study. I think it should include safety. I think it should, being sure that safety concerns are met. But yeah, I'd like to go ahead.
Diane?
I also support moving ahead with this. When can we pin down a date that you think it might be ready for the Plan Commission?
Well, I think I said late September, early October, but I do think it's really advisable to get this outside review, and I can't speak for the timeline to get that done.
That would be before it goes to Plan Commission.
Yes.
And so then what would a timetable be at the Plan Commission?
I think hopefully if we get this outside review done, it would be, the earliest would be the second meeting in September. I think that might be optimistic, because we're really just beginning to draft. And then the next would be the first meeting in October.
And it's something that could be acted on at one meeting at the Plan Commission, or they could
Sure.
delay it as well.
Yeah. Sometimes, something like this, they might have questions that we need to come back with answers,
Right.
but I don't know that they've ever held anything more than 2 meetings, so they're very good at acting.
Bill? Oh, Charlie, I didn't see your hand up
Yeah,
again,
there-
sorry.
Just a couple, 3 things. The IDOT safety study that we've asked for, is going to happen in September. We'll get the results a month or 2 later. So it might be right about the same time that this hits. So if we have a little bit of a delay, maybe they'll be simultaneous. I think it'd be good to have that safety study in hand. My concern is that it took a long time for people to realize that cell phones were dangerous while driving. And, that was a cat let out of the bag, and it's been very difficult to put it back in. So I think keep that in mind with respect to electronic billboards. And then finally, I think I'm very comfortable with the schedule as proposed as Libby's proposed. I don't want to rush this issue. If we're going to do it, if there's majority support for it, then it needs to be done right. And so having all the reviews, all the public input, all the I's dotted, all the T's crossed is really important on this, because it's going to affect the city for a very long time. And as you know, I don't support it. So if it's going to have long-term impact, and I'm on the losing side, I want it to be the best possible legislation we can come up with.
Bill?
I haven't actually read the most recent draft that was sent because I didn't see the amended agenda. Didn't know we were going to talk about tonight, but I've read some recent drafts. I don't know how much different they were, but I offered some changes that didn't make it into the draft. So I wonder what the best way to have input before it goes to the Plan Commission is. It wouldn't come from us to the Plan Commission. It would go straight from CD to the Plan Commission.
Well, we're prepared to do a staff-initiated ordinance. It would be helpful to have suggestions.
Okay, so just talk to you.
But, it could be, has there ever been a staff-initiated amendment and a council-initiated amendment? I hope that we can, that, wouldn't happen. That'd be kind of funny, I think.
Okay, I think it most had to do with ways to limit the numbers and locations and make sure that we're getting the best technology available and things like that. So
we want to make sure that the amendments are made to the proper locations in the zoning ordinance, and the one draft that I did see did not have the correct sections changed. We want to look carefully at the change time, the locations, and the trade-offs. And the trade-offs might vary by areas in the city. So those are the types of things that we'll be looking at presenting to the Plan Commission, and having, these are zoning changes, they need to be debated publicly, as a process for building the record and open meetings. So it's important to get the proposed amendment out there so that we can then begin to get official evidence and build the case the way a zoning case needs to be built. So we're doing our very best, looking at what we understand is the Adams proposal, suggestions that council have made to date, the research that we're doing, the best practices of other zoning administrators and other communities. Some of the research, it sounds like Eric has also accessed. And then we have been, in the past, worked with expert attorney who's expert in signage and billboard law, and we would like that individual to review this and to make sure that we are making amendments that are lawful.
Okay, thanks.
Eric?
So do I understand from what you're saying that the best way for individual council members to have input from this point forward is to communicate to you directly, so that our concerns would be taken into account in drafting in the draft ordinance that you'll first send to the Plan Commission?
Yeah, input into zoning administrator's request. But really, the review needs to be a public review, and you will have that opportunity as well. It will come to the council. But why not try to get an ordinance amendment that works in advance? And there may be options, too. There may be alternative A, alternative B, alternative C. We've seen that in zoning ordinance amendments as well. And I know the Plan Commission is very interested in this topic. Many of the commissioners will have dealt with billboard issues from times past, and they can offer their expertise. I know there will be public input. I'm sure Adams will be there all the way through. We'll hear from businesses and residents and other folks during the Plan Commission hearings through that process. And then ultimately, there will be something brought to the council.
I guess, I'm sorry, just one more follow-up. I've sort of gotten the impression that the commissions, that it may or may not be considered, and I'd like to ask your guidance in this case, bad form for council members to provide public input at Plan Commission hearings, that we should wait until we hear their, is that I guess we're citizens, we could go, but is that, am I understanding the protocol correctly?
I think so, because they're recommending to the council, so it's maybe a little bit too much pressure to come, because you'll see it soon enough. So that's the feedback I've gotten. But you're right, of course, you're citizens and free to speak in that way.
Dennis.
Yeah. So as we evolve this process and we start, discussing the construction of whatever the Urbana City Ordinance is going to be, there's a lot of issues that are, I think, really important to consider, and I trust that we'll be discussing them in the future. One of the things that I have already observed in the past, after allowing the small sign digitalization for businesses in our community, that there's going to need to be a part of the ordinance that has to do with addressing the periodic review of the signs that are that will be installed or would be part of the construction, to make sure that they follow the strictures that the city creates for the use of these billboards or whatever sign vehicles we're going to look at. Because even on the recent bus tour that we just took, I observed that the small signs that are posted for various individual businesses in the community are not following the guidelines that we actually established for them, as far as stationary and timing and scrolling. And if we're not able to maintain the guidelines that we've established for the small signs, I do have a concern that we're going to be facing similar issues with the large signs. And so I think that there needs to be a suitable mechanism to ensure that the guidelines, whatever the city guidelines are going to be, as far as action, no action, motion, no motion, can be addressed.
And if you see something that you don't think complies with an ordinance, and of course our ordinance keeps changing, please let us know so that we can enforce it. I think that there will be, if you're thinking about applying a different approach to enforcement, that's the type of thing that we really need to go through the special legal review on the administration and enforcement. But really there should be no reason why we don't enforce, and so it would be helpful to know those instances and we can follow up.
And if there were going to be, say, penalties indicated for not following guideline, I think we should include that discussion in our process.
And that is a type of thing. There's so much litigation on signage law and billboard law. That's the type of thing that we would want to be very careful of singling out some signs for a different treatment. We don't want to do that. But it's something we can certainly talk about, and I think it's a real concern that all the signage regulations be enforced fairly.
So I might understand then that the process here is you and your staff draft something. Does Adams or do others have the ability to speak with you during that process, or is there going to be any kind of communication with the company that's going to be regulated about the draft, or do they just wait until the Plan Commission?
You know, I think informational is helpful, but any kind of debate or ordinance shaping should be a more public process. But we've communicated with Adams all along for years, so I wouldn't see that that would be any different.
Okay. So maybe a study session or something would be in order?
And we need to get on the zoning track. We need to get on the zoning track, prepare something, hold the hearings, and let that process start. And probably the sooner the better, and we will do our best with the staff proposed amendments based on what we've heard and what the practice is and what we believe is the best way to regulate the digital billboards. And then it'll go through the public process as zoning changes should, in the public view, and I'm sure it will evolve.
And so part of that evolution will be, once the Plan Commission recommends something to the City Council, we will have our opportunity then to make changes.
Yes, and you know, as you go through that, it's important that, you know, that be transparent and that there be good rationale, and I'm sure that Mr. Simon and myself will help to guide if we feel that we're getting into an area that might cause problems for the city.
Okay. Eric?
So if I could summarize what you're saying, I'm just read it back to you and see if I have it right. All lines of communication between the staff and individual aldermen and the public and the company, all these lines of communication are open. Communication will flow freely, but there's no negotiation. You, at the end of the day, you take all this input and then you decide what's the best thing to put before the Plan Commission.
It's information gathering,
Yes.
and then we'll present something, and then the debate should be in the public
Right.
forum.
Okay. Do we have any motions? Do we?
If I could speak to that, I think there was already a motion that we would take this up in the fall, and staff is taking it up. So, you know, if everybody's happy with the proposed schedule, then we'll be looking forward to seeing it at Plan Commission.
Well, I can't say that I'm happy with it, but I guess it is what it is then. It's, this has been a long time already, a long time. So it was delayed once, and I hope it's not delayed anymore. Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 8. An ordinance amending Urbana City Code, Chapter 12.5, to add a new Article 4 regarding relocation assistance for tenants. Libby.
Here's another item that took a while to get back to you. So we're making progress, but there's a bit of a backlog, and you know, again, we've had short staffing of 25% now in community development, but we've got, like I said, enthusiastic staff, and we're getting a lot done, and we'll keep pushing along. And this effort goes back several years. Some of you will recall some earlier reports on the whole issue of tenant relocations when there have been building closures for reasons that have been outside of any control of the tenants, non-payment of utilities, code issues, condemnation, et cetera. And we actually worked, starting in 2009, this trend began to become more apparent, and we worked with a number of other agencies to develop a number of approaches to help provide a safety net and a network for these tenants who found themselves homeless through no fault of their own. This was also at the time that we established a Tenant Relocation Assistance Fund. We've talked about that in the past. We've been able to help many individuals and families, and in fact that's what we're working with currently on the Barnes Mobile Home Park. One of the things that we talked about, and all along we've worked closely with the tenant union in these efforts, but one of the things we talked about all along was the need to strengthen our ordinances to require landlords to provide relocation assistance to tenants in those situations where the code violations were created by the landlords, not by the tenants. And these were situations that were at no fault of the tenants. So what you have before you tonight is an amendment to Article 4 in Chapter 12.5 of the Municipal Code regarding landlord-tenant relationships. It simply adds on to that, and it requires that the landlord provide that relocation assistance to the tenants in those cases. And I know that this came up again last year when we talked about some of our problem properties and some of our other ordinances. There was a request for the staff to begin to look at improved tenant relocation assistance and to work with the tenant union at that time. Just some of the summaries of what we would ask the landlords to do in this ordinance would be to provide to the tenants a refund of any of their prepaid rent, including any unused balance of the current month's rental payment, to refund the security deposit, to assist with the cost of the physical move, like a moving company or a moving van, any household costs to reconnect utilities, and if there's less than 30 days notice of the relocation, that there be provision for temporary housing. And we also include timelines for that assistance to be provided at least 3 days prior to the requirement to vacate the premises, and that there be repayment when the tenant presents invoices, bills, paid receipts within 1 business day. If the landlord fails to comply with this section of the city ordinance, proposed ordinance, there would be our standard violation fine of up to $750 per day. The ordinance also calls for, in the case that the city provides that assistance in the absence of the landlord, that there would be further a civil penalty that the landlord would have to repay to the city, and there would be civil penalty on top of that. We had looked over the past several weeks and months as we drafted this, we had looked at the possibility of also providing for additional funding for the city to provide a safety net in the case of landlords not providing this assistance. But it was determined that really could serve as a deterrent to doing the right thing and providing the assistance. So we didn't want to go down that road, but we wanted to start with this simple requirement to require the relocation assistance. We can assess that, and if it's found later on that we need to establish some kind of financial safety net by the city, we can provide that at a later time. So the fiscal impact of this particular proposal would not be significant, could in fact be positive to the extent that the landlords would comply with this and provide that assistance, so that fewer tenants would feel that they need to go to the city to get that relocation assistance. We had a team that worked together on this ordinance. Kelly Murkowski, John Schneider, Jim Simon, Mike Monson, and Esther Pat, who met with us and reviewed early drafts, provided some model language for us, and the tenant union is very much in support of this ordinance. We also heard from some of the folks at the Regional Planning Commission who work with tenants who lose their housing, and they also supported this. Any questions?
Yeah.
Well, not so much a question, I guess it's a question. It's important to note that this applies to very, very narrow criteria, and that conditions that would trigger this ordinance are those where a unit is either condemned or has been rendered unfit for occupancy due to failure to maintain the unit. So it's not a broad category. It's not acts of God or nature or anything like that. It's very, very narrowly applied. So I think it's important for the public to understand that. So this is not this won't affect 99% or more of the landlords in this community.
I wanted to point out a typo on the first page of the ordinance at the very last line, and I can correct this. It says sections 12-5-46 through 12-5-55. It's actually 51. That last number, 55, should be 51. And Diane Marlin's absolutely correct that this is a narrow category of circumstances where it's due to landlord negligence that the tenants would need to move.
Any other discussion? Mayor?
Yeah, I'd like to point out that we did look at what other cities do. So I think we come up with something pretty reasonable.
Dennis?
Yeah, I agree. I think that this ordinance is focused on a very specific experience where the landlord has shown an inability to maintain a property in a livable and safe manner. And it places the responsibility for that failure completely and squarely on the landlord where it belongs, and not on the city for it to come up with the solutions which were mitigated by the situation in the complex that's going to be cited. We're talking about safety of the property, safety of the tenants, property codes, and probably this is going to be initiated only after multiple attempts to try to work with the landlord or the managing party of the complex or the building to adjust and to satisfy those needs, which all people have the right to experience as far as safety and livability conditions. So I'm willing to make a motion that
We have a member of the public to speak.
Public's going to speak. Okay, well then, I'll allow the public to speak. But I support this.
Eric?
If I could just ask one quick question. I intend to support this, but so this won't affect my vote, but how does this compare to any comparable safeguards in Champaign?
Champaign has been interested in our efforts on this ordinance, and we shared with them, so they may follow suit.
Anyone else? Okay, I have one public input card, Esther Pat with the CU Tenant Union is in support.
Thank you. I'm Esther Pat. I live at 706 South Kohler Avenue, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Champaign-Urbana Tenant Union in support of this. Just to sort of repeat what everyone said, but just to be clear, if the city condemns a property because of the landlord's failure to maintain, the landlord is in breach of the lease, and the landlord owes to the tenant, just under common law and contract law, everything's spelled out here, and in a lot of cases, more than what this ordinance provides for in terms of compensation to the tenant for the landlord's breach. Basically, the landlord has to make the tenant whole. The problem is that, and it's only happened a few times, but on a few occasions, landlords who are quite capable of giving back the deposit and the balance of the month's rent wouldn't even do that. Because primarily, and this is my opinion and my observation, because the tenants were poor and the landlord knew that the landlord could just give them nothing because the tenants didn't have real access to the courts and wouldn't sue them. And that's the problem that this primarily addresses, is to get the landlord to pay the money that the landlord should have to pay. And the benefits, from the city point of view, this obligates you to nothing. This only creates entitlement for you and entitlement for tenants. I think it's important. I know if health and safety is threatened, you folks won't refrain from condemning, but certainly in the decision about condemnation, one of the things you worry about, whether, especially if it's more than one unit, if it's a whole complex, or even the whole building, is what's going to happen to the people. This is this is primarily designed to address that you make clear to the landlord, we're condemning, and if the landlord doesn't cough up the money, the landlord is going to get fined, and which means it will cost the landlord more, because in the end the landlord's going to have to pay the money anyway. And in the event that the city does pay any amount of money for one tenant or all tenants or whatever, anything you pay becomes a debt, for relocation becomes a debt immediately due and owing to you by the landlord with the fines. And the whole point of it isn't, of course, to generate fine revenue. The whole point of it is to give the landlord the appropriate incentive to do that which the landlord would do if the landlord were, or likely would do if the landlord were, the property were condemned and the landlord's tenants were all, say, for example, University of Illinois students who have a free lawyer, and you betcha would go for all this plus the difference in comparable rent for a comparable place and maybe even some other stuff. So I'm glad to see this, and I encourage you to support it. Like everything, it won't solve every single problem, but in all those cases where the landlord upon whom you are condemning is perfectly capable of paying this money and has properties against which you get a lien and everything else, I think this will work to get them to just pay, and that'll save you a lot of work, and it'll save tenants the risk of homelessness.
Diane.
This actually just raises a question in my mind. We had a case, of course, in my ward where Mr. Zaruki had 3 properties that were condemned and 3 others that were deemed unfit for occupancy. And in that case, he simply moved a bunch of the tenants in the condemned buildings into other of his nearby properties. And in many cases, probably most cases, I'd say the tenants didn't know what their options were or what their rights were. So I didn't see in here any notification procedure to the tenants themselves that tells them what they are entitled to under this particular ordinance.
Yeah, I would suggest you deal with, not that I'm against codifying everything, but this ordinance is amending Chapter 12.5 of the City Code, which is the chapter on landlord and tenant. So there's nothing in the language about what the city is. What else the city would do about notice to tenants or anything else. This is about the responsibility of the landlord to the tenant when it happens. And I would just suggest if you would even do something like that, I mean, I think you would be able to do it administratively. Now that you have this, it would be easy, though that's a real good point, Diane. When you're going to serve a condemnation, you give a notice to each tenant telling them the city's going to be condemning on March 27th, and here's what the landlord has to do for you. But if you want to put it in ordinance, I would just suggest maybe you should put it someplace other than Chapter 12.5.
Well, as long as I think as it gets done. I mean, we
Yes.
give them notice
It would
anyway.
be- I mean, we
Yeah.
send them letters,
Yeah.
tenant union assists, we would add it to our language, add it to the website, so.
But yeah,
wouldn't
we
be
might not
forgotten.
find out about it right away. So,
Yeah.
so
I think
that's.
it
I
just-
think Diane has a good point that when the city serves, when you go out and you placard it, you're going to give the notice to each household saying the place is condemned. You have to vacate by such and such a date. The notice should include this information. I think the problem with a year ago was that the city didn't know what to say to the tenants necessarily, and that's how you ended up with this, what I thought was a really bad solution of let the landlord just move them along. And as you point out, the reason the tenants went ahead and moved into the place with the same landlord, the place across the street, was they didn't know what else would happen to them. I mean, people pretty much just thought they'd be homeless. But if you have this and you notify them of it, yeah, I think that can make a big difference.
Charlie.
Yeah, quickly, I appreciate the clarity with which you state the case here, Esther, as usual.
Not as usual, but
A general
thank you.
question for you, sort of like the flip side of what Diane said, is will this be another tool that we can use to motivate some of these landlords to get the stuff done right in the first place?
Boy, I sure would hope so, though I don't know that wasn't the primary motive here. The primary motive here, at least from my perspective, was when it gets to the point where the city just says, we're done. As Diane pointed out, this isn't for if there was a fire or tornado or something. This is just for when the city's been working on enforcement, doing the usual code enforcement, and it's to the point where the city has to condemn. And more often than not, in terms of numbers of times, it's one unit. It's not you hear about the ones that are a whole building, but there are times when just a single rental unit becomes unfit and is condemned. The whole idea here was basically to be able to to get the landlord to recognize that when you're condemned or when rental registration is pulled, you got to pay this money, and you got to pay it right away in time for the people to move, or it's going to start costing more. And that's the fine is really the most important part of this. That's really all this. Like I said, all this does is spell out the. I mean, it's like a codification of a portion, but not 100% of the landlord's common law duties. But the difference is there's a fine they have to pay to the city if they don't do what if they don't do right by the tenant.
Carol?
I just wanted to ask Libby in the summary of this, the background information on the front page of this packet item tonight, describe the additional relocation assistance that was passed this year, but that may not be available in the coming year. What happens in the event that you do have a landlord like that with multiple units and they have to move all these people and the landlord doesn't do that? What would the city be, looking at on relocation at that point?
Can I answer that question? I'm going to come here and sit here and say, council members, you need to find the money, and come up with something. That's like the same deal with-
we did this year.
You didn't have in your year's plan the money you ended up setting aside for
That's right.
Barnes Mobile Home Park. You all decided that was important. So, and that's the whole point. Is you look at it on a case-by-case basis, and you see. That's the best suggestion. That's my understanding. But if Libby has a better answer, I just think this doesn't answer that if that's what you're asking.
Well, I think it's case by case. We really, really try to avoid homelessness. This is another tool in the toolbox, if you will.
Yes.
But each case is different, and Red Cross helps, other agencies help, and we have, with our small tenant relocation assistance funds, we have helped really desperate people, but it's made a difference. But there may be some cases where this is not enough of an incentive, and you might see Esther come here. I mean, we'll try really hard to avoid that and preventing the problems before they get to that point.
Charlie?
Yeah, but I think the bottom line of this is that in the event that the city has to spend money, and it was the landlord's responsibility to have to spend it, we're going to go get the money.
That's the point.
One way or the other, and that's so if we take it out of our our revolving accounts, we hope it's basically a debt to the city, and we're going to get it back one way or the other. We get most of them back, don't we, Jim? Eventually.
That's the hope.
Yeah, I think you can get a lien against the property, and as we found, for example, like the property in Southeast Urbana, even the threshold for you being able to force the building to be torn down rather than for it to someday be sold to someone, it's well, I won't. It's in almost all cases you're going to end up after you condemn, you're still going to have a building. And so that building has a value, and so you can get a lien against it if you win in court. I also want to say one thing. This is not to knock the American Red Cross. I mean, I think the Red Cross is a wonderful organization, but just so people know, the Red Cross does not provide relocation assistance ever to anyone, not even in cases of fire. The Red Cross will pay for a hotel room for a couple of nights, and that's part of what this is about. Is it's so often when these things come up, that seems to be the solution. And from my perspective, it's like it's just so what you want to do is get these people out of sight, and then they'll be homeless and no one will know because the News Gazette and Channel 3 and whatever can show up to Gateway Studios or to 1301 Silver and find all the people there. So let's disperse them, give everyone $200, send them on their way, and 3 days later they'll be on the street, but they won't all be in one place where the media can find them. And I know that's not necessarily the motive, but that is sometimes what happens. With the Gabe's Place one back in 2007, 19 apartments were occupied, but 21 apartments were occupied. 19 of them he'd already evicted in court, so they weren't going to get anything. There were 2 households, and what he offered, and one of them found a place. One was a single mom with a baby, and he offered to give her $200. And the same thing, $200 would have gotten her out of the way, but it would not. That's not even enough to put down a month's rent. Plus, he had her deposit and the whole month's rent for that month, and the eviction notice or the condemnation was March 2nd. He just didn't pay because no one was going to make him do it, and that's what we're trying to change here.
Diane?
Well, I'm ready to move this. Can we get this going? I'll move ordinance number 2014-08-080, which is an ordinance amending Urbana City Code Chapter 12.5 to add a new Article 4 regarding location assistance for tenants. And I move that we send this to the council with a recommendation for approval.
And I'd like to second.
I think we need a motion for a technical amendment. based on Libby's
Hmm.
correction, right?
Oh,
Is that in,
The corrected ordinance?
she had a
Oh,
a
okay.
typo.
I don't think we need a, yeah, we don't need a motion for that.
The clerk is saying I just need to make the correction.
Okay, so we've corrected that on its face. There's a motion and a second. Does this require a roll call, or it's just a voice vote, right? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the ordinance is passed. Not passed, is passed the council. Agenda item number 9, resolution number 2014-08-043R. Resolution approving and authorizing execution of an exclusive consulting and sales listing agreement with CBRE Inc. for the 200 block of South Vine Street.
Good evening. Brandon Boyes, Economic Development Coordinator, and I'm joined by Gordon Hendry of CBRE. Before council tonight is a resolution and a draft agreement which will authorize CBRE Incorporated to represent the city of Urbana and market the 200 block of South Vine Street to prospective developers. CBRE was selected as the most qualified applicant responsive to the city's public request for qualifications, which began back in March. Staff is very excited to begin a new effort to redevelop this important downtown site with the guidance of CBRE's experienced team and the resources available in their national and Midwestern network. The agreement would provide CBRE 1 year to market the property and aid the city in finding the developer that is the best fit for this site. These services are to be provided at no cost to the city. Instead, CBRE would receive a commission for the successful development of this property. We are joined tonight, again, by Gordon Hendry. He's first vice president of CBRE. He's also the former director of economic development for the city of Indianapolis. And we can answer any questions you have.
Charlie?
Yeah, I spoke to Mr. Hendry just before council meeting began. This is exciting, and I'm glad we're here. I really welcome the outside interest to the community. I think new blood is always welcome in this kind of thing. It's a little bit of a tricky property, though, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. The one thing when I look at it, it was sort of like, it's like 4 quadrants divided up by the electrical power that comes in from 3 different directions, essentially. And that's going to take some major thinking. I think there's some underground utilities as well, a sewer system or whatever, that also come into play. Have you given that any thought, what can go on there? I think that to me is one of the biggest impediments to a large-scale development.
Well, first off, let me just say it's a pleasure to be here in your city. Pleased to be before you tonight. We haven't done a thorough analysis of the property yet. That is in our scope of services. So if you see the proposal that we submitted, we're going to be conducting, assuming this is approved, we're going to be conducting a very thorough analysis, market analysis, site analysis of the property, so that we can best inform the city on the development potential of the site prior to developing an RFP, a request for proposals, for the development community and running a competitive development process. So the purpose is that you know up front, or you have a pretty good idea of what the art of the possible is before you really get out there and start marketing the property.
Dennis?
Okay, so welcome. And we're certainly interested in having the property successfully positioned and having a useful and enterprising solution to it. Charlie has mentioned some concern about utilities, and then maybe this question is more for Brandon. As a resident of the East Urbana and the Huna neighborhood, which is immediately impinged to this property, to the east, the neighborhood association has a lot of concerns about how the impact to the property size, traffic may affect the neighborhood itself, which begins on the next street to the east. And we have some concerns in the neighborhood association about how the interface between the neighborhood and the development would could be modified or take into consideration a buffer to the community or to the immediate neighborhood, so that the residents on the various streets that are going to be directly east of it will have the least amount of impact as far as possible noise or traffic or whatever. And so what I guess, Brandon, I want to know is how can our concerns in this area be reflected in the proposal that we're looking for development? And also, my other concern would be, can we make suggestions to the potential developer, or can we add or lay out a desire for a design that reflects or respects the historic quality of the downtown, so that we don't end up with a super modern skyscraper, kind of thing that looks like a Lego. Yeah, thank you. A Lego construction that doesn't relate very much to some of the. I mean, we don't have in place at this point design overlay in that area. So my concern is visual symmetry or compatibility. So can we include these concerns into the, or does this come later when we make evaluations of the projects that are proposed?
Mm-hmm. The principles that you're describing were taken into consideration in the 2011 RFP that was issued, and staff has had every intent of carrying forward those recommendations, both in the RFQ process that CBRE has been responsive to, and as well as continuing to communicate those in the eventual RFP that will be issued. As was believed years prior, we believe that there are potential design solutions that would fit very nicely on this site, that would both serve to give an expanded feeling to downtown and still transition appropriately into the neighborhood. However, this process, what we stand most to gain from it is to learn what the private sector has to answer to that. So to the extent possible, we should define in advance during the RFP process what our expectations are to developers, and then wait and see what they come back with. I think the important limitation that the city will have as we move through this process is that there is a breaking point in terms of the extent to which the city can dictate the development of the site. At some point, we have to allow the developer to take over, and so finding that balance is something that we'll be asking the guidance of CBRE for. There are any development is also subject to all the typical zoning and site restrictions. And I'll allow Gordon to join.
Yeah, just making those interests available to your future clients or responders, is just really important to us, I think.
I would just respond as well and say that we always want to have a significant community engagement process. So, and that includes members of the public, the neighborhood, relevant stakeholders, but also the city. And so we want to see at the end of the day the vision of the city communicated in the RFP. And at the same time, we don't want to tie the hands of the development community such that there may be something creative that somebody has an idea for, that we want to see, that we want to encourage, but we can set guidelines in that RFP, and developers will be incented to try to be as consistent with those guidelines as possible, and they may throw in an idea too that could be considered, but ultimately, and at the end of the day, the city is going to make a decision what's in the best interests of the city, based on the vision of the city, the density, the mix of use, the impact on the neighborhoods. All of that's going to be ultimately, at the end of the day, subject to negotiation with a preferred developer and subject to approval by the city.
And I would say that the Unit neighborhood acknowledges that an interesting and more significant structure is going to be built there. some of the concerns that they have for the area are included in the white paper that was amended or appended to the city, what's it called, the urban plan of 2005. So just that as a reference, you know, to the development, it might be a useful tool.
All right, Carol?
I just wanted to ask a question in here on fiscal impacts. It says that on page 3, that basically this agreement, the city doesn't have any, at this point, financial impact, except under the conditions that viable redevelopment proposals are refused. At that point, what would be the cost to the city? It seems as if we're getting your expertise seemingly for $0. But if a council here does not like the ideas that come up, and I'm reading your proposal, which I think is great, but they turn down all of those development ideas, then what? What's the cost to the city?
So let me point out that in the draft agreement on page 12, it outlines what that repayment would look like in the event this kind of thing happened. So it's $3,000 a month up to a maximum of 1 year, so $36,000 would be the total liability in that instance. So it is specified in the agreement. And I feel this is somewhat similar to Councilman Roberts' question, yeah. And I left out one important step, and that is the city, in addition to having direct input into the RFP process, we also, and as Gordon mentioned, will be negotiating, but the result is a development agreement that comes back to council. So you basically have another area in which you can negotiate and sculpt the intended outcomes. Now, we have been upfront about the main expectations we expect for the site. That was in this RFQ. It will again appear in the RFP. If we can't then further refine those to a degree that's, you know, or if we've refined them to the point of that it's sufficient in the development agreement, you know, at that point there really should be no reason why the city should change its course at that point. And I'll defer to Gordon to talk more maybe about experiences in which this may have happened, but it's important that the city, in good faith, show CBRE that we intend to stick with them through the process, and I think that's why we support having this in the agreement.
Can I do a follow-up question, Mr.
Sure.
Chair? Just so he can answer it as he answers this. So I'm clarifying on, so you pointed us to page 12, which doesn't really clear it for me. So are you saying that if the city either refuses any of the development projects that are recommended after you do your study and analysis, or for whatever reason terminates the project itself, the cities then have to pay $3,000 per month, like for how many months? I mean, how is that clarified? Is it $3,000 per month for every month you've worked on the project? I don't think that's clear. Thank you.
So the purpose of this provision, and I might add that we've never used it, so we're really in a not, we definitely do not want to be in a position to have to ask for essentially a cancellation fee. And really the purpose of it is just a little cover for us as a large company. We're going to be spending a lot of time and bringing a lot of resources to bear for the city over the coming months to make sure that you're armed with the best information, the best market information possible, and that we make sure that your property gets exposed not just in the state of Illinois or the Chicago region, but throughout the entire Midwest with our relationships with the development community. And I know that there are developers outside of the state of Illinois that I think will be very interested in exploring and potentially investing in, a thriving college town. And so I think that, to answer your question, yes, it's in there. It provides a little cover for us as we, should something happen, But every expectation that we have and every hope that we have is that at the end of the day, we're all extremely happy that there's a successful project that's affected with a selected developer. And you know, in another city, I might be a little more concerned that we wouldn't be able to do a project. We've represented cities that don't have everything that your city has going for it, and are a little more economically challenged. And under those circumstances, even, we have not seen that happen, because ultimately our goal is, as your advisor, to get you across the finish line with a project that you all are not just happy with, but excited about. So that's kind of the purpose of that provision. We, again, just to reiterate, we've never actually had that happen in my experience, but it's just a little cover for us as we, you know, spend really the next 4 to 6 months ramping up and marketing your property for you.
Mr. Simon.
I think the key to the answer to Councilman Ammon's question is in the very first sentence to which she's referring. It says, if the city terminates the project without reasonable cause. I would imagine that if somebody presents a viable project, the city would, under other circumstances, accept and buy into the project. I doubt the city would then turn around and say, oh, we're not going to go ahead because we just don't feel like it. If the city has a reason for not approving a project, even though they may get involved in the negotiation process with what the project looks like, the project design, materials, what have you, composition, then if the parties can't reach agreement, the city has, you know, just cause for saying no to that particular project.
If I may add, too, the hope is always to have a backup. So, you know, in the event that there was ultimately an issue with the preferred developer, the goal would be to have at least one backup where you could go to and continue to negotiate and ultimately have a project agreement with that, you know, second backup developer.
Eric?
Do the projects that you facilitate are they ever capitalized by money that's coming from overseas, or is it always domestic capital that's driving the development?
It's a great question. You know, in my recent experience, we haven't seen as much overseas capital. You know, depending on the size of a project and depending on the city, you might see that. I primarily work here in the Midwest, so in my experience, traditionally it has not been financed but with overseas dollars. But I'm sure that some of my colleagues could speak a little more intelligently about projects in New York or LA or other coastal cities.
Diane?
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, I'm very excited about this. I think the potential is great, and we're in a much better position than we were 3 years ago when that other proposal came through, which leads me to my question and a bit of concern. On page 5 on the RFQ, at the bottom, it says preferred development outcomes, and apparently the city is most interested in a project that has ground floor commercial and upper story residential. And my concern is, why are we limiting ourselves to that? It seems to me a location like this would be great for a high-tech firm. I mean, why wouldn't we want 100 or 200 well-paying jobs right in our downtown who will go out for lunch and eat in our restaurants and spend money? So I'm concerned. I don't want our RFP to have this very limited vision. I'd rather first floor commercial, fine, so we get the sales tax and retail, but as far as what goes above that, I think we should, you know, let's see what's out there. It's a great location for a whole lot of things, and I don't want to see a whole bunch of 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom student apartments there. I think we need to think bigger than that. And and not just limit ourselves to residential. It could be a mix of residential and office, but I want to see us having a little bit bigger vision for this area. We only, I mean, this is once in a lifetime for this 1.7 acres in this location.
So the RFQ, that particular section of it wasn't intended to be strictly limiting of the kinds of opportunities, but to communicate, as Councilman Roberts brought up before, that there's been a fair amount of discussion with the city and with the neighboring residents of what kinds of developments may be considered acceptable there. However, staff did not recommend this RFQ process searching for brokers with the intent of simply limiting it to those ideas. As was sort of laid out before, it's very important that we hear a response from the market. And we've selected, we believe, the broker who can give us the best exposure and bring us the most diverse number of options. And it will really be up to ultimately the council to decide if what that best option is. And it may be somewhat different from that original conception, but I want to be clear that we're not writing that in stone in this process.
So this is not the language that will appear in any RFP?
Correct. This is the RFQ that was issued when we were searching for a broker.
Okay, I understood
okay.
that, but it's, flat out says our preferred use is this, and I'm not sure that is our preferred use, is it? I'd like to see us be more open to
Well, again,
ideas.
we're going to perform a market analysis, so I think we'll have some recommendations to Brandon and others at the city as to what some potential uses might look like. And certainly if there's an opportunity to bring Google to downtown, then I think that would be something that we wouldn't say no to. But I think your point is well taken, though, that you may lay out some potential uses, but really let the market come in and give you some ideas.
I mean, as you noted, there are a whole lot of things going for us down here, so I think we ought to see the best fit for this area.
Bill?
Yeah, I think this is a great approach to take. I'm really looking forward to it. My question mostly is, I didn't see any specific requirements for reporting, and it looked like within the first 30 to 45 days you're planning on accomplishing quite a bit: the due diligence, the vision planning, market analysis, and feasibility study. Would there be something come back to us at that stage before the RFP is developed that we would be able to comment on, or would there be any public meetings, or would this be like proprietary information that would come out of the marketing report?
That's really up to Brandon and his team. Our intent will be to provide some written materials that reflect, what we've laid out in our scope of services. If that's something that the city wants to do in terms of having some level of community engagement pre-RFP, we've done that, and that, I think that can potentially help the stakeholders. I mean, it really is a case by case. Some cities don't want to do that. Some really think it's important. So it's really up to the city and the city's team to tell us. We'll certainly make some recommendations as to what options are, but really it's up to the city decision makers to tell us.
Okay.
Charlie?
Yeah, I think.
I'm sorry, Bill had a follow-up.
I just had one other follow-up. I think the compensation would be basically 3% of the total project value. Is there any way, or have you done projects before where you as the developer recruiter would be incentivized to keep the city's expense in the project as low as possible, as far as how much we contribute in TIF money or reimbursements or something? Is there any way to incentivize that through the commission? It's never happened, huh?
I haven't seen that before. I will tell you that we're currently working with the cities of Bloomington, Indiana, and the city of Ann Arbor, Michigan, 2 other Big Ten cities under similar arrangements. You could probably do that, but it would get awfully complicated, and probably be my recommendation not to do that. Our interests are aligned with the city's, so we are your strategic advisor through this process, and we have a fiduciary interest to the city, not any developer. And so our goal will really be to make sure you make the best decision consistent with what you want to see happen on the property.
And hopefully we have other properties that this could lead in maybe to something else too.
Yeah, absolutely. We came upon this approach, and we are hoping that if it's successful, that we could apply it to other properties. In addition, if there are strong applicants who are interested in doing projects in this market, but they aren't chosen, or maybe they're not the best fit for this site, we would hope to encourage them to look at some other properties in town. So just the process of reaching out and bringing new interested developers to this market could have side benefits, certainly.
Charlie?
And that's the point I was about to make. I think the process here that's described in the agreement is what we really are after. It's a much more sophisticated, much better approach to getting this out there and done. And so I'm ready to move forward on this as soon as everybody's got their questions. So I'll
Eric?
make a motion as soon as Eric's quick.
So I wonder if you're in touch with people at the university about university plans that are related to economic development in the area. I mean, possible new medical college or dramatic expansion of the medical college in combination with the College of Engineering and others would be, if you're not plugged into that, would be very good for you to have, I think, an ongoing conversation with them, because that might provide you with things to tell people in this potential high-tech area or, science area of opportunities that at that site. So, for example, the most likely site for the it's early days for this new medical college, but most likely site is within, I think, about half a mile or 6/10 of a mile from the site that we're talking about.
Another great point. This is a Big Ten town, and, universities are critically important to the economic development. So you want to make sure that they, as a stakeholder, an important stakeholder, there's great communication with them up front. So that is absolutely something that we were intending to do, make sure that there's alignment with the university, that we understand what their vision is, and how the development of this project could be complementary in that. So that's a great point. I think that's something that we would intend to do.
Dennis?
Yeah, just one more. Just one thing is that I think that if you provide the developers with the current zoning map, they can see the adjacent zoning, that would help them perhaps understand one of my concerns.
Charlie?
Yeah, I think, we're hoping for a big hit here, and, the mix of retail business, office space, and residential matches with the micro-urban environment that we're moving towards and into, and so I think this will let us address that, and some mix of what appropriate mix that the process will help us define. So I'd like to move Resolution 2014-843R, resolution approving and authorizing the execution of exclusive consulting and sales listing agreement with CBRE Incorporated for the 200 block of South Vine Street to council with a recommendation for approval.
Second.
It's been moved by Charlie, seconded by Bill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Uh,
10.
Okay, agenda item number 10, resolution number 2014-08-044R, resolution approving modifications to the City of Urbana and Urbana Home Consortium FY 2012-2013 Annual Action Plan, Home County TBRA Amendment.
Okay.
Hi there.
So staff is proposing an additional tenant-based rental assistance contract with Champaign County Regional Planning Commission to augment its no limits program in the amount of $115,000. This would allow an additional 15 families to participate in the program this year. The amendment is needed after delays in planning and construction for contracts that have set back the Urbana Home Consortium's overall program timeliness. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has set the deadline of August 31st, the end of this month, to sign contracts for any remaining program funds that are allocated but not obligated from fiscal year 12-13. So the funds would be diverted from the City of Urbana's portion of the home funding program, whole house rehabilitation, funding allocation as outlined in the annual action plan, and there are sufficient carryover funds to continue the program without interruption. If you feel like this is deja vu, we did bring an amendment a couple months back trying to solve this problem originally. HUD has increased, well, they've kind of come down on some of the environmental review requirements rather significantly. So it used to be that we could document the status of the site, look at hazards, document all these things in-house, but now they want us to do a lot of sort of outsourcing and consulting. So it's not enough to look at a site and determine that it's a certain feet away from a runway at an airport. I now have to contact Fresca. I have to contact Willard, and that adds a whole lot of time in waiting for people's responses. And then on top of that, I have to verify what I've been told by Fresca and Willard with the local FAA regional office. So that's just one aspect of like a 15-part review that's involved with just the environmental side, prep side of doing a construction undertaking. So that being said, the project that we intended to do at 301 Thompson has been delayed, and since we have this deadline that's really close, tenant-based rental assistance is the only activity essentially in the home program that isn't really impacted by these changes to environmental reviews, and so that's why we've recommended for the remaining amount of funds that need to be committed for fiscal year 12-13, that's the activity that we've chosen. And we also had a TBRA contract with Community Elements, so we've kind of been going through the list, if you will, with our different TBRA providers to make sure we're dispersing the funds in a way that makes sense and fits with the capacity of each agency that's participating.
Carol.
Now you can put that in layman's terms.
Oh.
So what I'm trying to understand is No Limits is usually funded through RPC, and you're asking us to take home consortium funds where we could redevelop some homes in the City of Urbana and move them to RPC's No Limit program, and I don't understand why we would do that.
So we actually have funded as a consortium, so between the City of Urbana, Champaign, and the county, we have funded tenant-based rental assistance several times. Originally, actually, RPC was the one who ran the program, and it was like a $300,000 grant. So they were the ones operating the program, but the funds were actually coming from all three entities. So it's not out of the question that we would do something like this. Now it's just that Urbana's kind of in a tight spot. We don't have any shovel-ready projects right now, and we found ourselves kind of in a tight corner, I guess, if you will. So we were hoping that we would get our fiscal year 14-15 contracts, or our funds. They call it an authorization for release of funds. We were hoping we could get that and get some of the current fiscal year's projects going, but based on HUD's timeline, we're not actually going to even get our money in time to sign contracts with Habitat for Humanity. So this is sort of, we're trying to put the cart before the horse, and it's not going to happen. So you are correct. Your assessment is correct. We are using Urbana's money to do TBRA. We're doing it through RPC because we don't have the staff capacity to do it. TBRA is actually one of the only activities where you're not allowed to use any of the program dollars for running the program. So you can provide rental vouchers to families, but you can't pay the staff to do it. So it is kind of a catch-22, if you will, and RPC is unique in just the breadth of grants that they have available. They have other grants that allow them to run these programs for the case management, et cetera. And then we are able to come in and bring in the actual rental vouchers to make the program effective.
So this allows for an additional 15 families, not families that are already funded through
Correct.
RPC.
Yes, yes.
Diane?
So these are federal dollars running through Urbana, but now they're going to go to RPC. And will they be directed toward Urbana residents?
It's hard. A lot of the families are actually coming from homelessness. So how do you say where they are from when they don't actually have an address? So I've personally always been a little wary of saying you have to only serve Urbana residents. It sometimes just pigeonholes the people who are running the program. And if they can't find the people that fit the parameters you're looking for, I mean, they could just tell me, well, they're from Urbana. The person could say they're from Urbana. Do we really
But
know?
they're mostly, they're actually homeless, is what you're saying.
Some of them, yeah, depending on what. They also sometimes come from like Department of Child and Family Services, so depending on referrals and how all that works too. But they are limited to Champaign, Urbana, and unincorporated Champaign County, essentially. That's the consortium. I can restrict it. If you want me to, I could tell RPC we only want to serve Urbana residents. It is an option. I just didn't want to, because then I have to follow up on that, obviously, in my monitoring.
I was just
it's
curious,
taxing.
so
Yes.
as long as it's at least within the cities or the county.
Yeah.
Bill?
That's kind of what I was going to ask. I don't understand, like, if this is rental assistance and they're going to be living in a place that does the payment go to the tenant without us knowing where they're going to be living? If we know where they're going to be living, then we'll know whether they're going to be Urbana residents or not, so.
Yeah,
Would it
no,
be that
the
hard?
payments do go to the owner, the landlord, for obvious reasons. We don't want to hand a tenant cash and expect them to use it appropriately necessarily. So I could restrict it to the fact that they have to rent in Urbana. That is an option as well. I hadn't actually thought about it coming from that side, so that is an option. It's difficult because depending on where they're attending school, the No Limits program comes with a self-sufficiency component. So if they're attending Parkland College, it might be a bit of a burden to say you have to live in Urbana, but you got to figure out how to get to West Champaign. So that would be just another concern I might add. But it is a good point.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Mayor?
Did you say that you had an August 31st deadline?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should just go ahead and get this done.
Mm-hmm.
It's August 11th.
Charlie?
I think it's use it or lose it, right?
It is, yeah,
Basically,
unfortunately,
And
that's
so-
the situation
And
we're in.
if we weren't able to use it in item A, and we weren't able to use it in item B, so this is item C. Is that the way I understand it?
Correct,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, followed, okay. So unless there are more
Eric?
questions, I'm ready to send this.
No, I concur. I'm ready to move
Okay,
it
I
forward.
move to send this to council with recommendation for approval.
A second.
Okay, it's been moved by Charlie and seconded by Eric. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the resolution is approved to advance to council. All right, the remaining two agenda items deal with liquor license issues. And as a liquor license holder in the city of Urbana, state law precludes me from participating in the discussion. Therefore, I shall turn over the chair to Diane for the last two items. And thanks, Charlie. I get to go to bed early tonight.
Well, you could just warm up a table for us, too.
Okay, we'll take up ordinance number 2014-08-078, which is ordinances amending Chapter 3, which is alcoholic liquor of the Urbana City Code, to amend Urbana City Code Article 3, Section 3-42, concerning Class T liquor licenses. And we have a presentation by Natalie Kenny Marquez.
Yes, I'm going to speak to both items number 6 and 7, so also the ordinance amending Chapter 14, the license and permits, schedules of fees as it pertains to the T3 for-profit festival promoter, which I'll explain what that is in just a moment. So earlier this year, Council directed staff to look into possible revisions to the ordinance governing temporary sale of alcoholic beverages, and those are known as the T licenses, as well as the fee associated with the T3 license. This topic became of interest after the city received some feedback from local special event promoters and businesses who were wishing to obtain a tea license but were not currently a liquor licensee here in the city of Urbana, as well as concerns regarding the relative expense of the T3 permit fee. As you know, Urbana is home to many special events and festivals which rely on obtaining a T category license as part of their event model. Some examples include Uncork Urbana Wine Festival, the International Beer and Food Truck Showcase, the Iliac Spring Music Festival. Some photos from some of these events are on the slide. By improving the city's T license structures and making them more accessible, there's an opportunity to expand upon these events and introduce even more festivals and events into the community. Special events and festivals are important tools for community development and known to produce outcomes including revenues for participating in nearby vendors, which we've seen, community pride, sense of place or identity, volunteerism, which we see with the Sweet Corn Festival and CU Folk and Roots Festival for sure, and general marketing for the community. There's also Main Street revitalization that can also be a positive economic spinoff from festivals and special events. Annual special events like the Urbana Sweet Corn Festival and Urbana's Market at the Square both have important social impact on the community, and they draw in participants from outside of Urbana and Champaign. Vendors, artisans, craftspeople, restaurants, hotels, they all have significant economic benefits from that. I'm going to try to go through the current tea liquor license briefly. The city has a number of tea licenses, T1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 is for a special event current licensee, and that's limited to a current liquor license holder in which sales must occur adjacent or adjoining to the premise of a current license and in an enclosed area. The T2 is for civic or charitable organizations and other non-for-profit organizations, and consumption occurs on the premises or within an area specifically designated in their application. The T3 is a private promoter, that's a for-profit special event promoter for sales of alcoholic liquor by the glass, cup, or bottle by a promoter of an outdoor festival. And then the T4, which is a newer tea license, is for tasting package sales at markets, special events, and festivals. This is like what we're doing right now at Urbana's Market at the Square. This is generally it's for tasting at an off-premise location. Tastings in 1 ounce for wine, 2 ounce for beer, and 1/4 ounce for spirits. It also provides the licensee opportunity for product information and education and package sales of liquor. So staff from the Legal Division, Community Development Services Department, the Mayor's Office, and the Urbana Business Association reviewed these T1, 2, 3, and 4 permits and identified that the ordinance language in the T licenses could be better improved to accommodate temporary outdoor special events. Our goal is to our goal of adjusting the license provisions to reflect current special events needs to hold on, sorry, I want to make sure I got this all correct for you. With the goal of adjusting the license provisions to reflect current special event needs and to better promote special events in the city with reasonable liquor controls, staff proposes making the following amendments to the T license. For the T1, the proposed revision would separate this license into 2 parts, which will allow the current licensee to host outdoor special events not only adjacent to their current property, but also off-site from their property. The licensee may only host a limited number of the off-site special events per year, but there will be no cap on the number of licenses issued to the licensee hosting a special event at or adjacent to their property. The T2 proposed revision would allow licensees more flexibility and opportunities to host more events. This license will no longer have an annual cap on the number of licenses issued to a licensee. The revision for the T3 actually deals specifically with the fee schedule. This license has a very high fee, which has resulted in very few events being hosted. Staff reviewed comparable fees in other Illinois communities and found this fee to indeed be significantly higher than any of the other surveyed in the other surveyed communities. So our recommendation is to adjust the fee for the T3, bringing the cost down from $1,072 per day to $150 for the first day and $50 each additional day. This amount is much more in line with the other communities we surveyed in Illinois. Currently, there are very few applications submitted for the T3 license due to the very high fee. So we're hopeful by reducing the fee to a more affordable amount, the city will potentially see an increase in the number of applications for the T3 license. With the T4, the proposed revision suggests following the recent successful Uncork Urbana Wine Festival, in which souvenir glasses were a part of the event, this amendment would allow festival attendees to retain that glass, that souvenir commemorative glass, if one was provided at the festival. And this is common amongst other festivals similar to that across Illinois. So by considering these amendments to the T license categories, as well as the amendment to the current T3 fee, the city, I think, demonstrates a commitment to the current successful special events and festivals happening in our community, and it promotes the opportunity to further community development and economic development through the promotion of potential special events and festivals. And I'm here to answer any questions, as well as Jim Simon and Libby Tyler and Cynthia Chandler from the Urbana Business Association is here this evening.
Oh, sorry. Charlie.
Yeah, so I really appreciate the fact that you guys tackled this in such a comprehensive overview of the whole process to address the issue. The one thing I still can't wrap my brain around, I like everything. I think everything's that came out the way I sort of envisioned it, so I really support it. The one thing I don't understand is why you're removing the limits from the different places. There were 10, people were only allowed to have 10, events adjacent to their property in a given year. And, there was a very small limit on the T2 licenses. So that probably needed to be bigger, but you've taken them completely away. And what's the rationale there?
So for the T1, as it's stated now, the maximum days for T1 license is 2 per month and no more than 10 in a calendar year.
Right.
So what we're proposing, if someone is having an event adjacent to their property, there wouldn't be a cap on the number of days, but then there would be one if they're having it off-site from their premise. We didn't really know why there needed to be a cap in the first place. And so we didn't want to limit the number of times an event could take place either, and that's the same with the T2. Right now you can have no more than 2 of those permits in a calendar year. Unless the event is co-sponsored by the city, then it doesn't count towards your 2. Similar with some of the others. So there really wasn't, we thought, a valid reason why there needed to be a cap. Do you have any input to
Another reason that was expressed actually came from something that we heard you all talk about, and that is if we limit it, have a relatively small number, typically those festivals would be downtown. So if there's the opportunity after somebody's sponsored 2 festivals, let's say downtown, and they want to sponsor a festival elsewhere in the city, they've used up their licenses. I think the purpose of eliminating the caps is to provide further means and economic opportunity for drawing more people into Urbana, because obviously these festivals and these events do draw people more than just Urbana residents.
Follow up?
Yeah, the follow-up here would be, I guess I'm just envisioning one particular place doing live band every week, for example, out in the parking lot. And that might detract from the residences that are nearby. If they were going at it every week, 52 weekends out of the year, that might become a little annoying.
Mayor?
I think that was the rationale, noise.
Mm-hmm. Well, the applicants looking to have a special event in which liquor sales would be a component, still have to go through a special event permit and process through the Public Works Department. That's routed around to all the departments and divisions. So that process won't change, and I know that there's specific language in that application that addresses sound and other time limits, yes.
Well, we'll see how it works. If it turns out to be a problem, we'll change it.
Dennis?
Yeah, and I've got maybe two questions, but I mean, based on that same topic, potentially then a business could convert public space into a private party location, you know, without end. There would be no way to guarantee that it would just seem that we would be providing certain businesses with perpetual use of city space or public space to conduct their business and basically double their footprint without actually purchasing or owning the space itself by using this as a non-capped experience during the summertime. So I mean, I guess it's the level of overview or oversight that we have on perpetual use versus, you know, when does it become perpetual versus special?
Well, there's, like I said before, the applicant would still have to complete the special event application, which addresses many of these concerns, you know, and it gets routed around to all the departments. And there's some language within community development that addresses use of space as well. And we talked about that in our, while going through this.
And to have a dialogue a little bit about this, okay, but then once, then there would be then a question about under what condition you would be allowing it for a certain weekend but not another because you have no cap. So any limitation to the use of space would be biased.
Jim?
Like many decisions that have to be made, obviously the points you're bringing are policy decisions, and if that's what the council wishes to, you know, reinsert caps or different caps, that's fine too. That's your call, being a policy. However, one point that should be remembered with any license, a license is not a property right. Because a business or an entity applies for a license, whether it be any kind of a liquor license or for that matter a hotel license, they have no lawful right to have the city or require the city to say yes. So obviously if it's going to consume public space, that means it's also going to consume public services for which it's up to the city. Charges can be made, limitations can be placed. These events do require a security plan, and if they do involve use, for instance, of public works employees or public works material, then those like the marathon, they have to pay for that. But even if they don't, the city can simply say, as it's routed through the process, no.
Is that a follow-up, Dennis?
Yeah.
Or did you?
Well, it's my other question.
Oh, okay. Then Carol.
So I could do it?
Yeah, follow-up.
Okay. And the other thing that that I guess I would like clarity about, and maybe this would be a process that we could do a review of what are, you know, the security plans as required for these events. Because we've heard in the past that sometimes the security plan is what sort of kills the potential for events. Maybe it's the fact that it's very expensive then to have to pay for city policing of an event. So it's not addended to the agreement, although it's referred to as subsection 3-49B below, and I didn't go to the website to read that. But I guess one of my concerns for community development and the city would be, can we review the security plans that the city requires to find out if they're overly stringent for temporary licenses, or can we lessen the impact financially on charities and what other groups that might want to apply for these, so that it doesn't become a major concern for them as well, and perhaps prohibit activity in the downtown.
As part of the special event application, security plans must be submitted. When these things come through my desk and the other department head's desk, that security plan is included in the routing of the application for the license. And while it's not my decision, because I'm not a securities person, I have seen in the past where changes have been recommended, a very major changes, especially where there have been problems in the past, have been recommended by either police or fire or public works. So clearly the plans are reviewed. They're just not off the cuff.
I believe Carol was next, and then the mayor. Yeah.
I actually want to make a motion to, for omnibus motion on ordinance number 2014-08-078 and 2014-08-079. I move omnibus on both of those items and would like a second.
Is there a second to take these in omnibus fashion?
Sure, I'll do it.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'd like to further move the two ordinances, 2014-08-078 and 2014-08-079, to council with recommendation for approval.
Moved by Ms. Ammon, seconded by Charlie Smythe. I had one question, and the mayor had a comment.
Yeah, I just want to say that the security plan wouldn't vary depending on the length of the event. It's what's going to be safe for the public. And that's decided by the police department and the fire department, and those are basic standards.
Charlie?
So I would make one request as part of the discussion for next week, if we get some more feedback between now and then on some thought on, limits and how we will keep it from becoming a perpetual issue. There's some examples I can come to that I'll bring to you privately, and try some different scenarios just to make sure that we're okay with this. And of course, like the mayor said, we can try it, and if it doesn't work, we can come back. So, would you like me to take the chair, Diane?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
without-
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just a minute. I'm not going to go into a speech. On the Class T2 licenses, which are for charitable or civic organizations, your presentation seemed, if I remember it right, it said there were no caps on the number of events that they could hold.
That's what we're proposing.
Well, in the text, though, it says not more than 2 Class T2 licenses shall be issued to any license holder in any one calendar year.
That's the current language.
Okay, so I'm reading the wrong language. Okay. All right, great. Does it still hold that the city, if a city's a co-sponsor, the caps, well, I guess there's no caps now. Okay, never mind. I misread that. All right, any further discussion? Dennis?
Yeah. Since the pages aren't numbered, I was going to be I'm going to refer to parentheses 6, a Class T for license holder shall be required to, and it lists A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and this is at the, this is near the top of one of the pages here in the middle. And I'm looking at item E, which says, with the exception of souvenir or commemorative glasses, collection for disposal of all glasses, cups, bottles, containers, and related materials following the consumption of the alcoholic product contents. So it's going to become one of the responsibilities of the license holder. And I'm just wondering if you're collecting commemorative glasses or cups or bottles or containers, would the word disposal might perhaps be struck and the word recycled be placed in there, because that would be a more green solution. Yeah, but we ought to encourage recycling, or or separation of trash so there can be recycling, if that seems convenient to you.
Mm-hmm. We actually have a nice setup at the market for that. Public Works received a grant for recycling at special events, and we're taking advantage of that at the market, where we allow for tastings.
But not every special event will be at the market, so I'm just
Right.
wondering about that, because many of them we hope will be elsewhere.
Sweet Corn gets to use the same things. That's exciting.
Well, I move that we add recycling to the list.
Yeah. So would you say like collect for disposal or recycling of?
Yes.
I'd second that.
All those in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Any other questions or discussion? I'm sorry to belabor this, but I cannot find the text that we're actually supposed to be voting on. I thought I was reading where it says ordinance, and then the next, then it says shall be and hereby is amended as set forth, and then the next page are all the description of the various licenses. Is that not what we are voting on?
The first was what is currently stated in the T 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the second is
Second what?
the second set of bullets are the amendments to the T 1, 2, 3, and 4.
I'm reading the text that comes after the whereases.
Which
Yeah. It's T2 specifically states that there's still a cap on the number of licenses in this text that's attached to the whereas page. There's no numbers, so it's hard to. What page is that?
No, it says that a T2 license shall be valid for a maximum of 2 days.
No, it says no more than 2 Class T2
Oh, yeah,
licenses
down-
shall be
down- oh,
issued. It's
that's
number
item
4.
So this is the original ordinance we have in our hands, not the revised one.
that's something we can. Right, right.
So we're looking at the original here. Is that?
I believe this was the one that we had worked on, correct?
I think we need the legislative copy for next week, please.
So should we send this with no recommendation and wait to get the end result, or what's the best way to handle this? I just don't want to approve something that actually isn't what you want us to, want it to be
Correct.
Yeah.
done.
You're right. We should just send this to council pending corrections and the right version.
I think we all, we, okay. We understand what the,
Okay.
well, just get us one we can vote on.
Yeah.
And I've got a typo.
And a typo. Okay.
I found a typo.
So, Diane,
Yeah.
so in actual order, then I'm the mover of the 2 ordinances. Then I will make the amendment to the 2 ordinances, 2014-08078 and 2014-08079, moving to council in omnibus fashion without recommendation for approval.
And as the
Second.
seconder, I accept that, yeah.
Charlie will second.
Yes,
Okay.
Charlie's the
All those in
seconder.
favor that we take those in omnibus fashion?
We already did that part. No, we're correcting the move now.
Oh, okay.
The omnibus doesn't have to be corrected, just
All
the
right.
move.
Right, yeah.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. We'll look forward to getting the final version next week then. Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned.
No further business before the council. This meeting is adjourned.